Welcome to another Elden Ring death recap, where I look at every one of my deaths and then categorize them, with the end goal of determining whether this game is unfair or not. Last time I looked at my first 10 deaths and determined that none of them were cheap deaths. Well, what do the next batch of deaths look like? If you want the quick answer, head to the last chapter in the video. Otherwise, strap in for this recap of incompetence, and as an appetizer, here's a montage of deaths number 11 through 30. Foolish ambition? It's not like I rushed Margit right away here. No, I started much smaller. After getting stuck at the Demi-Human Chief's last video in the coastal caves, I decided let's head to Stormhill Castle. So I fast traveled to the Lake Aegil's Site of Grace, which has a good view of the Storm Gate. But before heading on through, I wanted to explore the hill overlooking the gate, so I trudged up there, braving these lightning strikes before running into this guy. This is a Kaiden Sellsword. He's a bit beefier than the standard soldiers I had fought to this point, and he's on a horse. I hadn't quite gotten used to the concept of using a horse for combat in a FromSoft game, so I fought him on foot, and while I put up a decent fight, eventually this ended with my first death of this video. After respawning, I decided there wasn't anything worthwhile up on that hill for me, so I headed for the Storm Gate, where this troll was waiting to ambush me. The trolls are already a tough enemy, but this particular troll is extra tough because of all his soldier friends. I tried to draw him out of the Storm Gate to make this into a one-on-one battle, but he kept on enlisting more help from these Godrick soldiers. Surprisingly, that didn't matter because I beat this guy. That was a shock. I expected to be stuck here for quite a while. Instead, I found myself riding on through the Storm Gate and killing all these soldiers on Torrent, and then I was on the appropriately named Stormhill. However, nothing about that name prepared me for this quartet of wolves spiraling down out of the ether. But even though they seemed to come from the heavens, they just fought like normal wolves, so they were pretty easy. After an emotional conversation with this NPC in a shack, and discovering my first stone sword key, I decided to head over into this grassy area. Now, it was becoming nighttime, and those nocturnal bats showed up, so I decided to shoot at him with my bow and arrow. But this was FromSoft tricking me, because I ended up accidentally hitting this pile of rubble, but it wasn't a pile of rubble at all. It was a giant flame golem who was just playing possum, so I jumped on Torrent and rode away in a blind panic. Rather than go back immediately, I instead went to a secluded corner of the Stormhill and took out my frustration on some jellyfish and skeletons. Then, after further building up my confidence on more of those hurricane wolves, I rode Torrent towards that flame golem. It was still daytime, so I thought this could be a nice fight without those bats around. Things were going okay, I was handling this fight well enough, but night was slowly setting in, and with nighttime come those bats. And those punks ambushed me in the middle of this fight and sonic boomed me to death. After respawning, I immediately rode back and finished what I started in broad daylight. This was a long fight, but it was surprisingly easy, which explains why this golem hangs around with a bat entourage. After that, it was some minor exploration, killing these snakeball things and finding the Stormhill Evergaol. You might have noticed that I mispronounced it, and that's because it's spelled G-A-O-L, and I don't know how to pronounce that properly when I read it, but whatever. I didn't go in there though because I thought it was a major dungeon and I didn't want to do that right now. So I moved on to this crumbling fortress from which another one of those Kaiden Sellswords was emerging. Again, this was a challenging fight and I held my own until he activated some barbarian superpowers and deactivated my health bar. And here I've always thought anyone named Kaiden was weak and not worth my time. And to reinforce this fundamental belief in my value system, I went back and killed Kaiden just like I do in every video game.
I'm sorry, Kaiden. I had to make a choice.
After that, I explored what turned out to be the ramparts to the Storm Gate. At this point, I had leveled up enough to use that flail that I found in the last video, And then I tested the flail out on more of those plummeting wolves, which, by the way, wouldn't it be weird if that happened in real life, if a bunch of wolves or dogs just like spiraled in out of the atmosphere? Oh, baby, hi! Hello! That was as refreshing as using that flail. So now I started my march north to Stormhill Castle. However, I was quickly distracted by the destroyed bridge that I'd been eyeing since I arrived in Limgrave. I went under the bridge, and just past this creepy NPC, I found another destroyed bridge. I hopped off of this one to explore the cliffside skirting Stormhill Castle to see if FromSoft was hiding any cool secrets or really tough enemies up here. Instead, I just kept running into wolves. You know, a bunch of creatures I'd already fought. But really, should I complain? Because this third school of wolves was more than a match for me, and thus I had my 14th death in Elden Ring. After respawning, I made a beeline for my ruins on that cliffside, or should I say a wolf line, because I slaughtered every last wolf in that area. Now, I don't know what I expected to find up here, but I certainly didn't anticipate finding Liurnia of the Lakes, an entirely new biome, ahead of schedule. I am not one to sequence break in these games. When I play Dark Souls, I never take the Master Key because I do not want to skip most of Blighttown. But this vista was amazing. However, when Melina approached me at the Site of Grace and invited me to the Round Table Hold, I quickly rejected her because I thought this was Elden Ring's version of using the Master Key to skip Blighttown. I thought the Round Table Hold was some super high-level legacy dungeon, not this game's version of the Firelink Shrine, and by going around Stormhill Castle, I'd accidentally triggered a sequence break, so I rejected Melina's offer. For the next 15 hours of gameplay! My mistake. Another mistake I made was choosing at this point to fast travel from Liurnia back to the coastal caves to fight those Demi-Human chiefs who whipped my ass last time. And apparently nothing has changed. In fact, I seem to have gotten much worse, because during this reunion, I managed to get in exactly 0 hits, including this glorious miss. My next attempt seemed better. I marched in there, stood up against the chief, and had what looked like a battle to be proud of. I mean, I lasted quite a bit of time. I didn't bring his health down too much, but this death shows that I have what it takes to stand up to this guy. Then you slow down the footage and you realize that I was accidentally two-handing my shield for most of the fight without realizing it, and it goes from a battle to be proud of to one that I'm seriously considering editing out of this video. We'll see. My next 2 battles with this boss, I chose to use my weapons properly, but sadly this meant next to nothing as I did less damage than when I was shield bashing this guy. The following attempt, I did better. I was still not trying to run around much and I was still not doing much damage, but I was lasting longer. But to my utter dismay, at one point I turned around and the second chief had activated. And yeah, I'm a little bit fuzzy on what happened next because I had to change my pants. But the next time I changed my strategy, because I was doing so little damage and I'd accidentally drawn in that other chief, this time I went around the other side of the stone pillar and two-handed my flail. And I succeeded in not aggroing the second chief, but also, yeah, I'm kind of reliant on blocking in this game, so two-handing my weapon clearly didn't work well for me in this fight, and that's how my 20th death went down. But just as things were looking their bleakest, I showed so much improvement in the following 2 bouts with this boss. I drew the little guys with fire arrows and focused on them so as to make the fight with the chief as even as possible, and both times I dealt a fatal blow to the first chief, once with 1 healing flask left and once with 2. With the second chief, I tried the same strategy, but it didn't work nearly as well and the second chief killed me fairly easily. Still, this explains why I wasn't really frustrated with this fight, because it didn't feel unfair, it just felt erratic. Like, sometimes I would get my ass kicked right away, other times I would kill the first chief, so it was just a matter of time. But for now, I wanted a palate cleanser, so I left the coastal caves, headed down the beach, and I ran into these guys. Those of you who watched my last video will recall that I am terrified of video game octopuses, and last time I attacked one, I chickened out and fled for my sanity. But now it was time for an up-close inspection. And honestly, this first guy wasn't too bad. He still gives me a visceral chill, but he was so slow and wasn't damaging me too bad. I mean, I didn't think it was cool that he could heal himself by eating his tentacles, but I felt like I had a grip on this guy. Then I fought the second one, and everything changed. Maybe it's because I shot the baby octopus first and Mama Octopus wasn't too happy, but oh my god, this thing was all over the place! It still barely did any damage to me, but I was too busy screaming my head off to notice unimportant things like my health. In the end, I was victorious, but I had to run really far away to regroup and gather my courage. Elden Ring is just not good for my heart. Oh, baby, you're here to make me feel... Ah! sometimes the best medicine for abject terror is to go back to fighting Demi-Human chiefs, which is what I did. But once again, taking a break from these guys is a bit too much for me to handle, because I basically just ran into the room, grabbed my runes, and let them all swarm me without fighting back. I'm starting to wonder if people are going to think less of me from this video. But before I could figure that out, I was back at it. And no, these videos do not flatter me. Because as I was watching the footage, I was thinking, yay, I'm doing okay here, and I was happy. But then I got this sinking feeling as the footage kept going, because I saw my player character slowly backing further and further into the cavern, and I knew something bad was coming. And sure enough, just as I had the first chief on the ropes, the other chief announced his presence. And that was that. And I'd had it with Demi-Human chiefs for a while. It was finally time to head to Stormhill Castle. Enough procrastinating. I fast traveled back to Stormhill and marched up the hill through these soldiers on a mission. And that mission quickly ended when I marched into this grassy area and I got absolutely swarmed by soldiers. The next time around, I took Torrent through that grassy area, and while this was not a display of amazing skill, I managed to whittle the soldiers down. I did nearly die to this bomb on the approach to Stormvale that got catapulted at me, but one quick Torrent ride past the barricades and I was now on my own. Time to enter Stormvale Castle. Or so I thought, because before getting there, I gotta deal with Margit the Fell Omen, who jumped down onto these ramparts after taunting me. Margit is formidable, and by far the most imposing obstacle I've run into in these first 8 hours of Elden Ring. But despite hitting extremely hard and having a huge health bar, I found him to be a bit of a reprieve from the chaos and randomness of the Demi-Human chiefs. In fact, even though I died in this fight, I considered getting him into the second phase of the fight on my first attempt to be a major victory, and I told myself, I think I'll be beating this guy in like my first 5 attempts. Yeah. And it was the second time against Margit that the full extent of the challenge he posed became apparent to me. Again, his moves are very deliberate. He's not the hardest enemy to dodge, but it was about 2 minutes into the fight that I looked at my damage and I realized I had barely scratched him. What's the point of standing up to an enemy if you can't actually hurt him? Also at this point, I hadn't quite realized that his magic daggers are armor piercing, so I fell to him on this attack. But the bigger problem is I'm just not doing any damage. And the third fight was remarkably similar to the last one. And this is when I realized Margit is just exhausting. He's not frenetic like the Demi-Human chiefs, but that meticulous walk and measured style of attacking, he wears you down. It's a war of attrition where you absolutely need to be able to get hits in that actually do damage. So when I eventually fell to him here, I concluded that I needed to upgrade my weapons. Now you might be wondering, hey, why didn't you just go upgrade your weapons then? Well, funny story, I found the upgrade table in the Church of Ella an hour into the game, but I was so focused at that time on earning runes to buy a torch from the merchants so that I could explore the coastal caves that I literally forgot this smithing table even existed. It's one thing to not find it at all, but it's another thing entirely to find it and then just forget about it. So that is dumb, but there's a workaround to all this. Why didn't I just go to the round table hold and upgrade my weapons with the weaponsmith there? Well, funny story, remember that whole thing about how I thought going to the round table hold was sequence breaking because I'd already done things a little bit out of order? So I had told myself that I'm going to wait till I beat Stormvale Castle before I go to the round table hold, which doesn't really help me with Margit. So, funny story, I was now stuck at this incredibly challenging boss wall, and I thought the only way I was going to beat him was by upgrading my weapons, but I had already discovered both ways to upgrade my weapons. I just hadn't realized it. So, my only recourse at this point, my fourth attempt at this fight, was to try a different weapon, a scimitar. And while I again got him down to phase 2, he is an exhausting fight, and once he goes ballistic with those phase 2 holy weapons, I was struck down again. And then by the 5th attempt, I was doing that thing I do when I panic and start accidentally two-handing my shield for a portion of the fight. And even though I switched back to my weapon pretty quickly, Margit absolutely eviscerated me. And that's my 5th death to Margit. And now that I've disproven my initial theory that 5 attempts is all that I'd need to beat Margit, let's categorize all of my deaths and determine if Elden Ring is unfair or not. I'll be showing some stats in the corner, though don't know if it's here or here because things are mirrored when I'm looking in a camera. They are somewhere. The first number will be the number of deaths within this video, and then the second number are all of my deaths in my journey in Elden Ring. And the first category are the common deaths. These are your bog standard run-of-the-mill normal deaths that just sort of happen in FromSoft games. And while the last video was weighted heavily in favor of curb stomp deaths, this time 12 out of my 20 deaths were common deaths, where I just died to normal enemies or I put up a good fight against a boss with no regrets. But there were curb stomp deaths as well. Oh yes, there were. 6 out of my 20 deaths were curb stomp deaths. 5 against the Demi-Human Chiefs, and that last one against Margit. And I don't think I need to go into too much detail about him. I feel like I already did that. But what I find interesting is that I didn't think any of my deaths were really careless in this part of the game. There were 2 deaths that I considered, but I put them elsewhere. One is the first time that I accidentally triggered the second Demi-Human Chief by not minding my surroundings. But I thought that's not really me being careless. That kind of thing just happens in these games. But it's also not a common death because there is a very visceral emotion associated with this death, which is why I've created a new category, the oh crap category. And it's written crap comma O so that all the categories can start with C. But these are the deaths where something completely unexpected or terrifying happens. And this death fits that description perfectly. But what's not perfect are cheap deaths, which is the most important category. And I had one cheap death, the one where the bats ambushed me while I was fighting the Golem. And again, I considered making this a careless death because I didn't mind my surroundings here, but I chose not to. It's also not an oh crap death because this didn't feel like a natural occurrence. It happened because it became nighttime in the middle of the fight, and the bats just spawned here. And I love FromSoft games. They are super challenging, but they're also beautifully rigid. Like, you die, but you learn from that death because everything gets reset. Everything goes back to the same way it was before, and you get a chance to just do things over and over. It's predictable in a way, but this was not predictable. This was cheap because it was like Elden Ring was breaking FromSoft's code. Them spawning in the fight felt like the game world was being reactive. And if you couldn't tell yet, Elden Ring is a super stressful game for me to play, and a reactive game world is not something I look for. So that's one cheap death, but that's only one cheap death out of my first 30 deaths in this game. I think it's pretty easy to say that my journey through Elden Ring has not been unfair to this point. Hopefully it's as easy for me to ask you guys to like and subscribe to my channel. To make it easier for you, you can hit the subscribe button right...